Well, they'll start us eventually. Oh, there we go. Good evening. I'm calling to order the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting for the City of Richfield. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of the HRA meeting of February 20th, 2018.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any corrections or changes or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We've approved the minutes. Next, we have the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Mr. Stark?
Thank you, Chair Supple and Commissioners. Tonight's consent calendar contains only one item, which, when acted upon by the HRA in one motion, no further action or discussion would be necessary. Tonight's consent calendar item is the consideration of the approval of a resolution approving assignment and second amendment to amended and restated contract for private development in the Urban Village Tax Increment Financing District. Just one quick editorial. This is really just housekeeping. It's changing an owner of a portion of a property from one entity to another, and it really doesn't affect any agreements otherwise. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions? All right, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent calendar items, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved those. Okay, moving on to other business. We have consideration of the approval of a resolution approving a preliminary development agreement between the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and NHH Properties, LLC, for the development of the Cedar Point Housing Redevelopment Area. Mr. Stark.
Yes, Madam Chair and Commissioners. On November 28th of last year, the HRA directed staff to prepare a preliminary development agreement with NHH Properties for the redevelopment of the Cedar Point Housing Redevelopment Area, which is bounded by 63rd Street to the north, 16th Avenue to the west, Richfield Parkway to the east, and 65th Street to the south. The developer is proposing to develop approximately 218 apartment units and 64 townhomes on the property. The agreement provides for the support and cooperation of the HRA as the developer works to develop a feasible project for the site. The agreement identifies 4 issues to be resolved, including funding the financing gap, determining how the remaining properties will be purchased, the purchase price for the HRA-owned property, and phasing of the project. The agreement provides several benchmarks that must be met, including submitting a financial pro forma, sketch plan review, land use applications, applications to funding agencies, and outreach to property owners, or the HRA may terminate the agreement. The agreement requires that a full development agreement be negotiated by August 20th, 2018. If the terms are met, the HRA agrees not to solicit other proposals or enter into any agreement with a different developer in association with the site. And I would just call your attention to page 4 of the agreement itself. That lists out some of the milestones I discussed. And you'll see that the dates are pretty much 1 month at a time. We're looking for some indication of progress. What's not listed in that, that's a little bit earlier, I'm just going to go through these real quick. What's not listed in that, but it's earlier in the report, is that on April 20th, the developer would have to provide us with their financial information, including a sources and uses statement and a pro forma. Also on April 20th, the developer would submit sketch plans to the authority for review. That's very preliminary site plans for the staff to review. May 21st, the developer submits land use approval plans to the authority for review. June 1st, the developer completes outreach to all the impacted property owners. June 29th, the developer submits a revised pro forma to the authority for review. Also on June 29th, the developer completes applications to the Metropolitan Council and Minnesota Housing Finance Agency for any grants they might be seeking. On August 20th, we would have to have entered into a more full and robust development agreement, and have resolved the issues, some outstanding issues with regards to property acquisitions. So again, we will be keeping a close eye on these benchmarks and reporting back to you at our monthly meeting how we are doing on those. A representative of the developer, Adam Serafine, is here as well if you would have any questions of either him or staff. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions?
I would say we have an audience tonight, which is great. We don't normally get a large audience. Can you speak maybe in some plain language and add some color to what this means for homeowners in this area? What this agreement means?
Yeah. The agreement is with a similar, I would say, entity to the last agreement. There were two kind of principal people involved last time around. Lori Boyclair of Boyclair and Associates, and Adam Serafine of NHH Properties. They have since brought in another partner, Tony Simmons of the Simmons Group, who has his own set of development expertise. They each have different specializations, and it really rounds out the development team. Mr. Simmons had identified one possible source of funding for the gap that really, the financing gap that kept the project from moving forward last time. And that is the, maybe Julie can remind me of the name of the program, the PACE program. That's a financing tool. We're also looking at more creative ways to phase the project to make it a little bit easier for the developer to piece together. Again, another difference from the previous go-round is these kind of regular benchmarks that we can gauge progress. It's not a case of where it's a 4-month agreement and we really don't know until the end of the 4 months how we're doing. This way we should know all the way along that things are progressing. And the developer, again, would be out talking to neighbors by June 29th, I believe. Sorry, June 1st. They'd be out talking to neighbors. So hopefully that answers your question.
So I'm glad that you put some benchmarks in here because I'm a little hesitant after having things fall apart in the past. It's nice to see more structure to it. Is there any kind of financial incentive? Like if they do not follow through, is there a penalty of some sort? Or are we left on the hook?
No, the financial piece of it is really at the front end. They're agreeing to pay all of our professional services costs. That's costs of the HRA's attorney that's involved in this and the HRA's financial analyst from Ehlers and Associates. And the developer would be required to deposit $15,000 to pay for those costs. If the costs exceed $15,000, they have to backfill some of those costs. If we run into issues where the developer is not meeting some of the benchmarks, then the HRA would have the option to terminate the agreement. If we got to that point, there might be other penalties that we could bring back to you that would keep incenting the developer to move forward and not bring the project to a halt. But at this point in time, there are not penalties or incentives built in.
Because I really would like us to make sure that if we're going forward, we really are going forward and we're not just stringing along. The homeowners have been waiting for a long time. So we want to make sure, and that's why I like that there are benchmarks and definite things.
And, really, in my mind, the incentives are the way that the developer is really getting more vested in the project are each of the benchmarks. They are going to be having to go out and hire architects and engineers and financial people. And so every one of these benchmarks that we see they will have spent more of their own money getting more and more invested in the project.
Okay, so that increases the likelihood that it'll go forward.
That's our hope.
Are there other questions, discussions?
I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Serafin, at least in terms of the benchmarks and what's different this time, if you don't mind.
All right. And can you state your name for the record, please?
Commissioners and staff, my name is Adam Serafin with NHH Properties. And to specifically address the benchmarks, the project, as you have seen in the work sessions, has not changed substantially from the building structures and the number of units. So we're very comfortable with the plans as they will be presented. We've worked with John and Julie and staff on the financial performance. But the two big pieces that we have in front of us that are somewhat out of our control are filling the financial gap and then putting together a home purchase plan that works for all of the properties and the stakeholders that are involved. The tough component of a project like this is when you have, it's not just myself negotiating with the city and the HRA, it's myself negotiating with the city, the HRA, and all the homeowners. So getting all of these pieces to line up so that everyone's happy, so that we're all sitting at the closing table with smiles on our faces is, it's a tall task and it's very tough, but we've done it before. We've successfully gone through the process. The process takes time, as you've seen, and we're prepared to move forward with more structure this time because we did identify a lot of the issues that came up last time, and we've solved some of those problems. So now instead of having 15 or 20 different major issues in front of us, we've got two.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Serafin?
I would just add that this is a reminder that for this project, the HRA nor the developer has any power of eminent domain. These would all be voluntary sales by homeowners. To the extent that there were one or two people that were not able to come to an agreement with the developer, that might really change the pattern, the phasing of the project. That's why having more phases potentially, this could possibly go in 2 or 3 phases, and it would really be modeled around where the site acquisitions would occur.
So I might understand that at least this time we're looking at it, and if we're unable to, or if the developer's unable to reach an agreement with the residential homeowners, that the plan is set or structured so that there can be phased in, so we can do 20 townhouses or something, and kind of continue the construction while the negotiations are ongoing.
That's the hopes. Yes. And
So
Yep.
can you tell us, in this timeline, it says the homeowners have to be contacted by June 1st. So when do they plan to start contacting people?
I would presume during the month of May, pretty much throughout the month of May. And we'll take, and when I say we, I'm talking about we collectively, including you, we'll take a common sense approach to whether the developer is making good faith offers. I believe that there are 12 homes remaining out there. If they report back to us that they made offers and only 2 people accepted, the common sense approach might be that the problem wasn't with the homeowners, it was with the offers. If the converse is true, if the developer comes back to us and says, we were able to negotiate with 10 of the homeowners or 9 of the homeowners, and 2 or 3 for whatever reason aren't able to reach an agreement with us, that's a better indication to us that the developer would be working in good faith.
All right. Are there any other questions or things to clarify? Okay, we do not have a motion on the table at the moment, so If we want to move forward, someone would have to make the motion.
So at this time, I would move approval of the preliminary development agreement between the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and NHH Properties for the development of the Cedar Point Housing Redevelopment Area, and authorize execution of the agreement by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority Chair and Executive Director.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion?
Just a comment, I was counting the number of properties that, I assume it's the HRA own, and then the numbers that were owned by the public still.
It's
And,
11.
yeah, that's what I thought the number was. So 11 houses have not been purchased, and more than that have been?
You're
is that
right, it's 11.
Yeah, okay.
All right, any other comments, questions, discussion? All right, then we'll take the vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've passed the motion. Thank you. All right, next we have HRA discussion items. Are there any items that anyone would like to bring up? All right, then we'll turn to Mr. Stark for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can report that at the City Council's meeting last Tuesday, the council did approve building permit fee reductions for affordable housing projects. So for new construction, it's a 5% permit fee reduction, and for rehabilitation of existing units, it's a 10% permit fee reduction. That caps at $10,000 per project. So that's, another arrow in our quiver for providing affordable housing in the community. And that's the extent of my report.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to claims and payroll.
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving claims and payroll, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Seeing no other business, we stand adjourned, and in about 3 or 4 minutes, we'll start the EDA meeting.
Has anybody got their Hennepin County taxes yet? I got a couple emails last week, and now I know why.
Mine went up $500.
And I can't, it must be percent of how of the school referendum, which is fine. But I was actually sticker shocked. Mine went up $700, and most, and my homestead exemption went down, so I lost money on that. I went up on, but I think one of the things we keep forgetting is, and Steve did a good job of explaining it, the values went up.
Oh, yeah, the value of my house increased.
And so the multipliers go up. Huh?
We can actually start at 7:15 when we're done with that.
It's back on. So are we ready to go at this point? I didn't know if anybody in the audience had anything they wanted to say, so doesn't look like anybody's coming up, so. All right, at this point, we're going to call to order the meeting of the Economic Development Authority of Richfield. All right, please note the attendance. And our first item of business is approval of the minutes of the regular Economic Development Authority meeting of January 16th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any corrections or changes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes of the regular EDA meeting of January 16th, please say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, next we have approval of the agenda.
Thank
So
you, Chair
moved.
Supple. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself.
All right, Is there a second for the agenda?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. So next we'll move on to consideration of approval of program guidelines for the apartment remodeling program. Mr. Stark,
Thank you. It's just so exciting.
we were excited by this item. This is great.
Actually, tonight I'm going to be asking Housing Manager Julie Urban to provide the staff report.
Chair Supple and Commissioners, there are just under 5,000 rental apartments in the city. Built primarily in the 1960s, these apartments are aging and in ongoing need of maintenance and improvements. The Housing and Redevelopment Authority operated an apartment remodeling program in the past, utilizing funds from both the Metropolitan Council and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. However, funding expired in 2010. Since that time, we've sought other funds and haven't been successful until just recently when we created the Economic Development Authority. And in creating the Economic Development Authority, it of course has an interest in maintaining and improving the city's apartment housing stock. To that end, the EDA authorized funding for a Richfield apartment remodeling program in the 2018 budget. So tonight we are asking the EDA to adopt program guidelines to govern the use of these funds. The proposed program guidelines include the following components, and I will just say they were modeled primarily after our original program. So eligible properties would be apartments with 4 or more units and that are more than 30 years old. Loans would be limited to $50,000 per building and $5,000 per unit. Loans are in the form of 0% interest deferred loans with a 15-year term. So that means there would be no payments and no interest, and they would be forgiven after 15 years. 1-to-1 matching funds would be required, and priority would be given to properties that qualify as naturally occurring affordable housing. So in other words, the rents are affordable at 60% of the area median income. And then priority would also be given to properties that are not displacing tenants as a result of the remodeling. In addition, a couple of additions since the last time we had the program is that loan recipients would be prohibited from discriminating against Section 8 voucher holders. And I would say that isn't requiring them to accept Section 8, but they couldn't use that as a reason to not accept someone. And then in addition, we would require that if they were to sell the property, that they would give us 90 days notice of that sale prior to closing. So we have budgeted $100,000 for the program in 2018, and having you approve the guidelines at this time will help projects hopefully to be completed within this budget year. If you have any questions.
All right,
I had one.
go ahead.
If the building is sold before the 15 years expires, what happens to the loan?
They repay us. Yep, so it's similar to our other loans.
Okay.
Chair? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the ineligible improvements, number 8, is swimming pools, hot tubs, which totally agree with, but appliances. Tell me more about that.
You know, that's something that we have often had in our guidelines, and it's because they could be moved elsewhere.
Okay.
You know, we could pay for them, they could install them, and then they could move them to a different property. And so that's kind of been our standard. We could certainly change that. I mean, it's sort of unlikely. Maybe it's assuming
Yeah.
something that's not there, but
I think when I think of, improvements, appliances are a big one for me, right? Like energy efficiency
Right.
and safety in stoves
Yep,
and those sort
that's
of
true.
things
I think we were thinking too, as requiring a match, they could use their funds
for that.
to do the
Okay.
appliances. So I mean, it's something, you look at guidelines from other programs and you sort of keep some of it. And
Yeah.
so that's certainly something we could choose not to keep.
You had a question?
Yeah, I know that the city staged at least 2 meetings with landlords that have properties in the city. And a lot of the issues that have risen after concierge and everything were discussed and raised there. And my recollection is feedback on some was pretty hostile, feedback on others was pretty positive, which I guess is to be expected. But have you let it be known that this was coming into effect? I'm curious as to what kind of feedback you're getting from landlords, or if there's anybody's approached this knowing that it's in the pipeline as to to the availability and if we're getting the type of interest that I'm hoping we would get.
So, I mean, it remains to be seen who will actually apply. I sent out a notice to, we'd had, I think it was 9 or 10 property owners at a focus group last November. And so we sent the guidelines out to them as well as to the representative from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association just to let them know this was going on and if they had any feedback. And we did hear from a couple who are here tonight that are interested. We had quite a few takers of the program when it started back in 99 or 98 with these kinds of fewer strings, and that was kind of necessary to get folks to use the money. When we got a second round of funds from Minnesota Housing, there were quite a few more strings, for example, requiring income certifications on an annual basis. And that's tricky for a lot of our smaller owners, and so we were hesitant to put that in. And so our hope is by going, I mean, we could put things like income requirements and rent restrictions in, but I think we're going to be less likely to have people apply.
Yeah, I don't think you do a very good job of incentivizing when you put all sorts of tripwires out there for them.
I feel like so much of our housing is naturally occurring that really isn't going to turn over. They're not going to make improvements and vastly raise the rents. And you know, that's kind of our feeling, and we want it to be used. I mean, we'll see. As you know, Seasons Park has a lot of needs, and so we anticipate they may be applying for the funds, very likely will. I mean, they could use all of it for many years to come. So we'll have to see how we deal with that. I have, you know, the names of 3 different folks that our housing inspectors have passed to me that I will reach out to once the funds are, once I have applications and the loan documents. I mean, we had trouble getting the money used in the past. So if that's the case again, I think reaching out more directly to some buildings that we know need the funds. We did hear from some of our landlords that those who've been in the business a long time, they tend to have the equity right now, given the market, to make their own improvements, and they do it when. But so looking for maybe some of our newer owners that have more debt against the properties and are less able to might be our best way to use the funds.
I would rather see it being given to, I mean, it's not enough money to give it to a lot, but I don't think that I want it all lumped into one bucket. And I don't see anything wrong if applications are lagging and you're not getting a lot of people getting in contact with you with going out and asking.
Right, and I think that's what
Yeah, I think that's perfectly acceptable.
we may do, and because it isn't a lot of money, it's a drop in the bucket of
start,
needs.
You know,
but it's a start, and so if we can maybe strategically figure out ways to use it in good ways, we can do that. You know, targeting a building for energy efficiency improvements or something. We'll have to see if we have to get creative. I think at first. I don't think we'll have trouble getting rid of the first 100,000. It's not like the money goes away. It's not like a grant that expired, like the MHFA money was going to expire. So we ended up, I think, giving some of it back. This won't go away. We'll just have to rebudget each year and reprioritize with
and
our
I
other
would guess
needs.
that a lot of the landlords are aware of rebates and everything with energy efficiency, and they can double or triple what's going in just by making the right choices on what they use it for.
Right. So the more ways we can creatively multiply the impact of the money, the better. We'll
Thank you.
We'll see how it goes.
I had been wondering about the issue with the rents of that, would they price people out? But you're saying that you don't think that should be an issue at this point?
See, one of the criteria is priority would be given to properties that do not displace residents. And I think my interpretation of that is both not displacing them as a part of the improvements, but also not displacing them because of the improvements.
Okay, that helps.
So we will have conversations with applicants about their plans for rent increases, and I think we would probably get a statement from them as a part of the application on that.
I mean, I think we want to go in assuming honesty and straightforwardness, and if we have issues, we'll come back. I really,
because
so we'll come back.
Been an issue in the past where things have been fixed up and then the prices or the rents went up so high that people couldn't afford to stay.
Exactly. We don't want a repeat of that, but I mean, it's not what happened the first time we had these funds. I mean, there's a lot of needs in our buildings, and so
I think it's a great program. I'm glad
Yeah.
we're doing it. Other questions? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you said Season Park could use all of it, but they would only be allowed 50,000 max. Is that per 15 years? Or
well,
per
so I
year?
wrote it as 50,000 per building.
Okay.
So in theory, they could apply for all,
Because they have multiple buildings.
and then they could come back in another year.
And so then per building per year, or per building for the 15-year max? And when the 15-year max is up, they can come back.
That's a really good point. I should probably clarify that because that's probably what for 15 years. I think that's what
Yeah.
we would say.
Okay.
I will make that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You had another
And
question?
I was just commenting, I'm assuming all the landlords have to come in once a year and renew their landlord's license. I mean,
Right.
you certainly could provide everybody as they come in or when they renew them with a copy of this information so that they know.
That they're aware of it. Right. Yep. So we we have some lists. We have emails for everybody who has a rental license. So I would envision sending out a notice to folks. Whether we'll do a mailing, it's hard to say. But yeah, we will certainly be informing them. And when those renewals come out, and I think it's October, she does her mailing, and so it'll be a while. So we definitely want to get the word out before that.
You could start your advertising with free money. That usually works.
Mhm.
Mm. No, there isn't.
All right. Are there any other questions? Comments? All right. So at this point, we need a motion.
Okay. Let's go back. I guess I would move the program guidelines for the apartment remodeling program as set forth.
Second.
All right. And just to clarify, will that include the clarification that you brought up about how often they could apply? And you're also authorizing staff to prepare those loan documents? Is that all part of that motion?
It certainly could be, yes.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
The reasoning you gave for the appliances makes a ton of sense. So I think leaving those out.
You're okay with that? I
Yeah,
mean, again, if
totally.
it finds it is problematic, we can. I assume you'll let us come back and tweak things.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, Commissioner, that the appliances are important, but at least along those lines, there are things that are subject to inspection and looking at. So I understand having ones that work, but functionality is important, but as long as they're safe.
Yes.
And there's so many, and I don't know, 30-year-old, 40-year-old buildings have a lot of needs. And so I do the cooking in the family, so I would really want something that works well, but I guess I'd be more concerned about being safe.
Right.
And I think we get that through our inspections and everything, so.
Did I may I ask a question? Did I understand it was 100,000 per year total?
That's what's been budgeted this
Budget,
year is
okay, thank you.
100,000. Right.
Which, like I say, is a good start considering we're less than a year into the
Mhm.
EDA.
Well, and we're part of a group of other cities that are trying to push Minnesota housing to step up, and major money is needed here.
Right.
So we'll keep doing that as well.
So we can tell the state and the feds if they're looking a place to park it, we're open for business.
We have needs.
Well, and those partners, they like to participate in existing programs.
That's what I was going to
That
say,
helps.
right. Having it in place is a
Yep.
good jump start.
I have one more question.
Okay,
And
go
that
ahead.
is, it talks about matching, one-to-one matching funds are required. Does that mean someone who goes to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and gets a match to match your grant would
I
not
think
have to
that would
put
be
any-
acceptable. I mean, again, trying not to be overly prescriptive. Just a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, only your own funds," and I don't want to be that prescriptive. I think we just are looking to multiply our funds possible, and for someone to have skin in the game, whether it's applying for other funds or putting in their own equity or.
Okay.
All right, if there are no further questions, we'll put it to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, and thank you. That was a very good agreement. The executive director's report, Mr. Stark.
I
Oh,
have no,
I'm sorry. I apologize. I skipped over an agenda item. Are there any EDA discussion items? All right, now we'll go to the executive director's report. Thank you.
no, Madam Chair, I don't have anything to report. Right now, we don't have any items for an EDA meeting next month. Of course, that could change.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda are claims and payroll.
So moved.
Second.
And please note there are 2 months' worth here. Any questions? All in favor of approving claims and payroll, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, seeing no further business, we stand adjourned.